The Sultan's bill, what it actually cost to be Suleiman the Magnificent. Imagine waking up one morning and discovering you are now the ruler of the Ottoman Empire, sometime in the year 1520. You've just inherited the throne from your father, Suleiman. You have soldiers, you have territory stretching across 3 continents, and you have a palace unlike anything else on Earth. It sounds like the ultimate life upgrade. But before you get too comfortable, someone needs to show you the bill. Because ruling an empire this size doesn't just mean wearing a jeweled turban and issuing decrees. It means feeding, housing, arming, and entertaining tens of thousands of people every single day for decades. And the numbers behind that responsibility are genuinely staggering. Let's start with where you'd actually be living. Topkapi Palace, perched above the Bosphorus in Istanbul. This wasn't a single building the way we might picture a European palace like Versailles. It was closer to a small, self-contained city, spread across roughly 700,000 square meters, divided into courtyards, kitchens, treasuries, stables, a mint, a hospital, schools, and the private living quarters of the Sultan and his household. At its peak under Suleiman's reign, this complex housed somewhere between 5,000 and 10,000 people on any given day, depending on the season and whether the court was preparing for a military campaign. Now, 5,000 to 10,000 people need to eat. And this is where the numbers start to genuinely surprise people. The palace kitchens, known as the Matbah Ayamir, were not a single kitchen, but an entire complex of 10 separate kitchen buildings, each one specialized for a different group being fed. One for the Sultan himself, one for the harem, one for visiting dignitaries, one for the palace guards, and so on. Surviving Ottoman treasury records, kept with remarkable precision by palace accountants, give us genuine insight into just how much food this operation consumed. On an average day during Suleiman's reign, palace kitchen records suggest consumption in the range of 200 to 300 sheep, along with smaller numbers of cattle and, depending on the season, substantial quantities of poultry. This wasn't extravagance for its own sake. It reflected the sheer number of mouths being fed, from the Sultan's own table down to the lowest palace servants, all of whom received meals according to a carefully documented hierarchy of portions and quality. Rice was imported in enormous quantities since it wasn't easily grown near Istanbul, along with sugar, which at the time was still an expensive luxury good, used heavily in the palace's famous confectionery kitchens. Ottoman court records mention massive, seasonal shipments of sugar arriving specifically for the production of sweets and preserved fruits, some of it destined for elaborate banquets, and some of it used diplomatically, gifted to foreign ambassadors as a display of the empire's wealth and sophistication. Spices deserve their own mention here, because they weren't just flavoring. Black pepper, cinnamon, saffron, and cloves arrived through long, expensive trade networks stretching toward India and Southeast Asia, and palace kitchen budgets dedicated significant, some specifically to spice procurement, both for the Sultan's table and for the elaborate medicinal preparations produced by palace physicians, since many spices were also believed to carry genuine health benefits at the time. If we try to convert the palace's annual food budget into a single modern figure, historians studying Ottoman fiscal records estimate that kitchen expenses alone could consume a meaningful double-digit percentage of certain provincial tax revenues dedicated specifically to supplying the capital, a testament to just how much of the empire's economic machinery existed simply to keep the palace fed. Now let's move beyond food, because the Sultan's household required an entire supporting infrastructure most people never think about. The harem, contrary to a lot of popular imagination, wasn't simply a collection of concubines. It was a highly structured institution, home to the Sultan's mother, his wives, his children, and hundreds of attendants, all organized in a strict internal hierarchy with its own budget, staff, and administrative structure. Historical records indicate the harem alone employed hundreds of servants, guards, and administrators, each receiving salaries, housing, clothing allowances, and food according to their rank within this internal system. Suleiman's own harem became particularly famous because of one woman, Hurrem Sultan, originally a slave of Slavic origin who rose to become his legal wife, an almost unprecedented development in Ottoman court tradition at the time. Hurrem didn't just hold personal influence. She commanded her own household budget, funded charitable foundations, and financed significant architectural projects across the empire, including mosque complexes, soup kitchens for the poor, and public baths, projects that were themselves substantial line items in the broader Ottoman fiscal system. Then there's the matter of clothing and textiles, an area where Ottoman palace spending reached genuinely extraordinary levels. Suleiman and his court dressed in silk, brocade, and velvet, much of it produced in specialized state control workshops. Surviving palace inventories describe robes woven with gold and silver thread, some requiring months of skilled labor to produce a single garment. The palace maintained enormous wardrobes for the sultan, changed regularly according to season and occasion, and this clothing wasn't purely personal indulgence. It functioned as a deliberate display of imperial wealth and power, particularly during audiences with foreign ambassadors, who were expected to report back to their own courts on the sheer visual magnificence of Ottoman authority. Now, let's talk about the single largest, most consistently draining expense in the entire imperial budget: the military, particularly the elite corps known as the Janissaries. The Janissaries were the Sultan's standing infantry, a professional, salaried military force, unusual by European standards of the era, where most armies still relied heavily on feudal levies rather than a permanent paid force. Under Suleiman, the Janissary Corps numbered somewhere in the range of 12 to 20,000 soldiers during peacetime, though this number swelled considerably during major campaigns. Each Janissary received a regular cash salary, along with food, clothing, and equipment, all funded directly through the Imperial Treasury. This regular payment system was actually one of the Ottoman Empire's genuine administrative innovations. While many European monarchs struggled with unreliable, seasonal levies of feudal soldiers who might abandon a campaign once their agreed service period ended, the Ottomans maintained a professional force that could be relied upon for extended campaigns, in exchange for consistent, dependable pay. But that reliability came at a steep and constant cost, one that grew heavier with every passing decade as the corps itself grew larger and, over time, gained enough political leverage to demand higher wages, sometimes through open unrest if payments were delayed. Suleiman's reign, spanning 46 years, from 1520 to 1566, included an extraordinary number of military campaigns, and each one represented its own massive, separate budgetary undertaking. Consider the logistics involved in a single major campaign, such as the 1526 campaign that culminated in the Battle of Mohacs against Hungary. An army numbering in the tens of thousands needed to be fed, paid, and supplied for months, marching hundreds of kilometers from Istanbul into Central Europe. Ottoman logistical records describe enormous supply trains of camels and carts carrying grain, ammunition, tents, and equipment, along with entire mobile bakeries capable of producing bread for the army while on the march. Artillery represented its own specialized and expensive category. Ottoman cannons, some of them genuinely massive by the standards of the era, required specialized bronze casting, skilled crews to operate and maintain them, and enormous quantities of gunpowder, itself an expensive manufactured good requiring imported sulfur and carefully controlled production facilities. The famous Siege of Rhodes in 1522, one of Suleiman's early major campaigns, required transporting and supplying an enormous invasion force by sea. An operation historians estimate involved hundreds of ships and tens of thousands of soldiers, sustained over a siege lasting several months. Naval power added an entirely separate financial burden. Under Suleiman, the Ottoman navy expanded significantly, particularly under the command of the famous Admiral Harem Barbarossa. Building and maintaining a fleet capable of contesting Mediterranean naval power required specialized shipyards, skilled shipwrights, and constant maintenance, since wooden warships of the era required frequent, expensive repairs and eventual full replacement. So where did all this money actually come from? This is really the other half of the story, because Suleiman's court didn't just spend extraordinarily. It also extracted revenue from an empire spanning enormous, diverse territory, from the Balkans through Anatolia, the Middle East, and North Africa. Provincial taxation formed the backbone of imperial revenue, structured through a complex system of land grants known as timars, essentially units of land whose tax revenue was assigned to support specific cavalry soldiers and officials in exchange for their military service. A system that allowed the empire to fund a significant portion of its military without requiring constant direct cash payment from the central treasury for every soldier. Beyond this, the empire drew substantial revenue from customs duties on the enormous volume of trade passing through Ottoman territory, connecting Europe, Asia, and Africa. Istanbul itself functioned as one of the era's great trading hubs, and taxes on goods moving through its markets and ports represented a significant, steady source of central treasury income. Suleiman's reign also saw the empire draw considerable wealth from newly conquered territories, particularly following successful campaigns in the Balkans and the Middle East, which brought both direct tribute and expanded tax bases under Ottoman administrative control. Now, here's where we can bring this all together into something genuinely useful, putting a modern figure on all of this. Historians who study Ottoman fiscal records generally estimate that the central imperial treasury under Suleiman's reign processed revenue in the range of many millions of gold ducats annually. Though translating this precisely into modern currency involves significant uncertainty, given how dramatically the relative value and purchasing power of gold has shifted across 5 centuries. What we can say with more confidence is proportional. Military expenses, particularly Janissary salaries and campaign logistics, consistently represented the single largest category of imperial spending, frequently estimated at somewhere around half or more of total annual expenditure during active campaign years, with palace household costs, including the kitchens, the harem, and court administration, forming a substantial secondary category. So if you genuinely found yourself sitting on Suleiman's throne in 1520, what would this all actually mean for you personally? You would command immense, genuine wealth, access to luxuries most contemporary European monarchs could only envy: silk robes, elaborate banquets, a treasury capable of funding campaigns across 3 continents. But you would also carry, every single day, the weight of an almost incomprehensibly complex financial machine. Thousands of salaries to meet, armies that expected consistent payment and grew dangerous when that payment was delayed. A palace household requiring constant, meticulous administration, and provincial governors, tax collectors, and financial officials spread across a territory so vast that simply moving information from one end of the empire to the other could take weeks. Suleiman earned the title the Magnificent in European accounts largely because of exactly this. The sheer visible scale of Ottoman wealth and administrative sophistication during his reign left a deep impression on foreign ambassadors and observers, many of whom returned home describing a court more organized, more disciplined, and genuinely wealthier than anything they'd witnessed in their own kingdoms. But magnificence, as it turns out, is never free. Behind every jeweled robe, every elaborate banquet, every triumphant military campaign, sat teams of palace accountants, tax collectors, and treasury officials, meticulously tracking an empire's income and expenditure down to remarkably granular detail. Because even an empire this powerful understood a simple, unavoidable truth: no amount of magnificence survives very long without someone, somewhere, carefully balancing the books,